Good morning to you. This is our adult Sunday school here through the Blue Point Bible Church. Today we decided to cancel our in-person services for a couple reasons. Nothing to fret. However, we're glad that we're warm. We're able to enter in on this study. As you can see behind me, if you can see the little picture on the screen, we have a bit of snow here on Long Island. Obviously, that's not a real picture, but just a sort of backdrop. That being said, we canceled our study, and it's a privilege for me to be joined by some here from the Blue Point Bible Church. We have Deacon Brian, Sister Sandy, we have Rashonda with us, and of course, those of you that are tuned in through social media. This is a neat opportunity we get to join with our online community, opportunity that we don't normally have as we gather here at the local church, Blue Point Bible Church. So what we've been doing for probably about 3 years now in our adult Sunday school is studying through the prophets chronologically. And we began about 3 years ago at the book of Jonah. And we've read chronologically through the prophets, starting ultimately at the 8th century BC, where the prophets began to prophesy. And now we find ourselves in the book of Isaiah, particularly Isaiah chapter 40. And we know that Isaiah is prophesying before and during the Babylonian captivity that came upon Israel in that period of 586 BC. And so that's where we find ourselves. Our goal going through the prophets has been an informed reading, meaning that we understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. We understand Jesus Christ to be the fulfillment of what the law and the prophets pointed to. However, we decided it would be advantageous to say, well, what was provided through Jesus Christ? What was hoped for, the hope of Israel? And how might we see that outlined for us in the prophets? And that being said, that's what we've done. We've entered in on the prophets, trying to become familiar with the language that we see in the prophetic literature, and then allowing that to inform us as to what was the hope of Israel. What was it that the Apostle Paul said? He preaches nothing other than the hope of Israel, of course, being fulfilled in and through the Lord, our Messiah, Jesus. And I believe our text today actually helps us understand that quite a bit. So we're going to see some very familiar phrases and things that are used in the New Testament. And of course, that's going to be important for us to notice why and how are the New Testament writers using these prophecies from Isaiah. So that's our goal as we enter in. And again, we're in Isaiah chapter 40. I hope that made sense. Brian, Sandy, Rashonda, is that a decent opening? Have I any questions before we move in on our study? Okay, Rashonda, sounds good. Brian and Sandy, it's okay if we move in on our reading here a bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've read through verses 1 through 8 here at the Blue Point Bible Church recently, but I want to just go through that in a quick review because, again, some of this is going to sound very familiar to you. Starting at verse 1. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. And let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So here, hopefully we've seen, there's some similar imagery that we've seen in the New Testament. Most of us probably thought of the ministry of John the Baptist. As John the Baptist had said, I am the one who is clearing the way for the Lord in the wilderness, calling the people to repentance. He was the one that was making smooth the desert, a highway for our God. And again, we know John the Baptist preached to the Jews, calling them to a period of repentance. One of the things he had said that is often brought up is he said, the axe is already at the root of the tree. The judgment is here. What you were reading about in Isaiah, what you were reading about in the prophets, this is that time. And we know that there's a twofold fulfillment of Isaiah. We know that there was this Babylonian captivity that came upon Israel for 70 years. And that's the interesting thing here in this text, is that's what Isaiah is talking about when he says her warfare has ended, her oppression, her bondage has ended. So Isaiah is speaking prior to the Babylonian captivity, and dare I say even during the Babylonian captivity, but prophesying that Israel's captivity is going to be ended. And again, we're going to lead in on our study of Jeremiah soon enough. And Jeremiah, he actually marks out that this was a reproof of Israel for 70 years, that the Lord would lead Israel into bondage for 70 years in Babylon, specifically the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin. And then he would bring them out of bondage. Now, to correlate this to the New Testament, we know that when they came out of bondage of Babylon, the Lord's presence was not restored to them. They did not have the Ark of the Covenant that they understood to be God's presence with them. And dare I say that the prophets that came next, the post-Babylonian prophets, they began to remind Israel, well, while you're not in Babylonian captivity, you're still in bondage. And that became the problem, was, well, then what are we in bondage to? And it seems as though many of you probably noticed this when we read through the prophets, Israel is quite dull. They don't realize their situation. They don't realize that it's not about God wanting you to offer up more sacrifice. It's about God wanting you to humble yourself. It's not about God wanting you to, have all these, sorry about that. Seems my computer's wanting to update. It's not as though it's not as though God's doing these things for you to become arrogant. That's going to be another point we're going to make here. But again, hopefully we see that the Lord is doing this to reprove his people to become the people he wants them to be. And when they come out of Babylonian captivity, they're not them. You still have not learned the lesson, Israel. These prophecies are for you now, but yet the fulfillment of them, again, noticing in the prophets where there's this sort of back and forth theme of restoration and judgment. And then you might say judgment and restoration. You kind of see it going back and forth. And that's what we see here in Isaiah chapter 40. These first couple verses are prophesying to a time where they're going to be released from this warfare. It's going to be a beautiful time, a time of, as the first verse mentioned, comfort. This is what, the Lord is going to comfort his people when this ministry comes about that clears the way for the Lord, where they receive recompense for their misdeeds, or as we often talk about, where the judgment of the righteous and the wicked, or every man was judged according to what he had done. This is what they're hoping for. So are we following along? Is this making sense? Please let me know. Jump in if you have any comments or questions.
Well, just when you said the post-Babylonian prophets, so when we read Isaiah, of course, Isaiah was a prophet, but are there other prophets as well as Isaiah saying these things? Yes. That's part of my question. And the second part is, if there's more than one prophet, why were they telling them the opposite? You're still in bondage, when the first prophet already said that the Lord's going to clear the way. I'm a little confused.
I appreciate you saying that. So and you've heard this phrase, Sandy, where we talk about the already but not yet. So what's happening here is Israel's coming out of physical bondage, but yet they're still stuck in the bondage of sin. And that's what the Lord was ultimately trying to reprove them of. It wasn't about them living in the land physically. And, while it's beautiful to be able to eat of our own grapes and, all these different things, that's the physical image. The reality of what God wanted to remove from them wasn't to take them out of the land and bring them into Babylon, but rather the spiritual reality was, let me take the sin out of you and bring you into glory. The unfortunate part is, while Isaiah is prophesying this, that the hope was not yet. And to answer your first question, that might make it a bit simpler. So we have Ezekiel, we have Jeremiah. Both of them are prophesying the same thing. They're both saying that Israel is going to be judged for their sin. They're going to go into bondage, but don't worry. The Lord is going to do a work that's going to restore you. Now, as we know, when they came out of Babylonian captivity, I believe that, yes, they believed this is it. There were many times in Israel's history where they believed this is it. We're going to be restored. This is the moment where the Lord is going to work in our favor. And yet it didn't come. And that's why it was the hope of Israel. It was something they kept hoping for, where they saw glimmers of hope. Again, thank God that he often, even in our own lives, he gives us glimmers of hope, but he doesn't fully manifest the reality until it is his time. And that's why we read in the New Testament, in the fullness of time, the Lord sent forth his son to be born of a woman, to be born under the law, to redeem those that were under the law, meaning these people who Isaiah is prophesying to. So there's the already in the physical sense. Yes, you've been released from bondage in Babylon. You've been released from bondage in Egypt, for that matter. Yet, for some reason, throughout all of these covenant judgments that the Lord has brought upon Israel, they are not removing the sin from their midst. So you see there's an already freedom, but there's still a not yet, which is only going to come, prayerfully, we notice this, it's only going to come through the Messiah. That's why the New Testament writers take these prophecies from Isaiah 40 and apply them to John the Baptist. They apply them to Jesus Christ, because the true fulfillment of Isaiah is only found, again, that is our stand as Christians, the true fulfillment of the law and the prophets is only found through Jesus Christ.
So I guess that's why Paul's partially, when he wrote in his epistles, except for comforting people in a personal aspect or bringing even discipline, so to speak, to a personal aspect of any church, he said he mostly speaks of the prophets and the law, but the prophets.
That's
so
right.
that, of course, was what he was talking about in the fullness of time.
That's right, exactly. And you know, Brian, as we've talked about this in quite a few of our studies, that it's impossible to understand the Apostle Paul if you don't go back and start looking at these prophecies. Or it's not impossible. Let's face it, what people often do is they just sort of presuppose what they think the Apostle Paul means, rather than doing the legwork of going back to the prophecies and saying, oh, that's what he's building on. So yes, we have to do the digging to get a better handle of what the Apostle Paul's doing in a lot of his writings. So an interesting point in this regard, there's a writing called the Shepherd of Hermes. It's a writing that's not in your Bible, but it's considered a writing that comes out of the first century. And in that writing, it says, all things are made level for his elect. That's one of the things the Shepherd of Hermes had highlighted. And he uses the text, obviously, from Luke chapter 3, verse 5, where it talks about, the mountains will be made level. And, the same thing we read there in verses 3 and 4. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain shall be made low. What this imagery is being used to show is that a way is going to be made for the Lord. It's not going to be, you have to go up above the mountains to find the hope of a God. You don't have to go to the depths of the sea to find the hope from God, but rather he's going to provide it and make it known. It's going to be clear. It's not going to be something you have to journey to all the way over there or journey away from. It's going to be his provision to his people. So again, the Shepherd of Hermes had highlighted that. I thought that's important because Christian writers see the importance of these first 5 verses as talking about Christ. And I say Christian writers, meaning those in the New Testament, as well as Christian writers following that commentary. Moving us a bit further into the text, I'd like to look at verse 6. It says here, now responding, we just saw this promise where the Lord is going to bring comfort, and he's going to bring this, he's going to make a way for the Lord. The Lord is going to be seen. The glory of the Lord will be revealed, verse 5. Now it says in verse 6, a voice says, call out. Then he answered, what shall I call out? All flesh is grass, and all of its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. So again, here, notice the text tells us, the text makes the point for us. It says, the grass withers. So we're saying, is he talking about the planet? Is he talking about, outside, because it's the cold and the grass is withering? He goes on to say, surely the people are grass. Those of you that follow my study know I love simple stuff. So I don't, we often find these questions where people say, why are you saying that the sea means the Gentiles? And oftentimes we have to go through this kind of backwards study of showing them why and where we believe that. And here, I love this text because it tells us for us. We don't have to sit here, it tells it to us. We don't have to sit here and say, well, what does the grass mean? The grass in this prophecy in Isaiah 40 is talking about people, the people of God. So now let's go back to verse 7, or I'm sorry, for that matter, verse 6. All flesh is grass. So all flesh is people, and all of its loveliness is like the flower of the field. Because again, we know that the people of the Lord are his glory. The people of the Lord looking to him, loving him, walking faithfully in his commandments is the flower of the field. It's the beauty of God. But the grass withers, verse 7. The people wither. The flower fades, but the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Now, as we read through this, prayerfully you noticed, this is cited by Peter in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 24 through 25. And what Peter does is he cites this to give encouragement to the saints in the first century, reminding them of this exact prophecy, that the grass withers, the flower fades, but the breath of the Lord blows upon it. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. And we know the word of our God is Jesus Christ. So this prophecy is ultimately pointing to Jesus, that while people may fade, the flower may fade, the people of the Lord might not walk worthy of his commands. It might seem as though all is dismal. There's no hope, but the word of the Lord stands forever. And if God has said he's going to preserve a faithful people, he's going to do something for a people that are going to turn back to him and praise him, then we know he's going to do it, regardless to how dismal the circumstance might be. And that's what Isaiah is saying to his generation. He's telling them, yeah, it looks bad. The grass is fading, even the flower. The people who seem to be faithful to the Lord, they've even faded. Right. However, the word of the Lord stands forever. So we follow that prophecy. Again, you're seeing comfort and encouragement being said here by Isaiah, but also, as we're noticing, this is being used by the New Testament writers to point out Jesus Christ as the fulfillment of prophecy.
Right. So in verse 7 there, he's not talking literally about the grass, or as you said, the planet. What he's using is symbolic. It's symbolism.
Right. And again, that's more of a reason why it's so important to read the prophets, because as you know, Brian, we get people that say, why are you saying this means this? Well, when you do the reading through the prophets, you learn the language. You learn why certain things mean other things than what they might ordinarily mean. Exactly. We talk about heaven and earth. Obviously, that's one of the phrases we often bring up, heaven and earth being used all throughout the law and the prophets to talk about Israel as a people. So here we see the same thing with this prophecy in Isaiah 40. This is talking using language like grass and flowers, but rather Isaiah hasn't changed his focus. His focus since the very first chapter of this book has been, say this to Jerusalem and Judah. Say this to the people of God and make this prophecy against them or for them. Again, depending on, as I mentioned, Isaiah sometimes says judgment and other times he has sort of promises and comfort. So got to follow his vein of thought, which is tricky because each chapter almost has, a judgment and then a promise, a judgment and a promise. It sort of continues through the whole book. But hopefully we see, and again, I find the best way to understand the prophets is ultimately to go to the New Testament, to find where in the New Testament this is being used and how the New Testament writers, for that matter, the inspired men of God, how they use these prophecies. And I do want to encourage everyone, take verses 7 through 8 and correlate them to 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 24 through 25. Continuing in the text, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 9, this is where we're going to get a bit of encouragement, and it's going to become a bit clearer as to what we're talking about. So again, I had mentioned verses 1 through 8, we had already sort of studied through here at the church and made those points. The rest of this is a sort of new point before us. So starting at verse 9. Get yourself up on a high mountain, O Zion, bearer of good news. Lift up your voice mightily, O Jerusalem, bearer of good news. Lift it up, do not fear. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Now, again, this is important, building on what we were saying before. Remember the time that Isaiah is prophesying. He's prophesying prior to Babylonian captivity. If you remember, going back about 3 chapters, or going back to chapter 39 for that matter, you read about a historical narrative of Hezekiah, the king Hezekiah, and how he was a good king. You can read about this in the books of Kings. Again, this is probably a great place to say this. When you're reading through the prophets, you have to be reading 2 other parts too. You have to read the books of Kings to understand what the culture was like where the prophets were prophesying. And then you have to understand the New Testament. You have to read the New Testament to understand the spiritual understanding of how the apostles, for that matter, and Jesus, for that matter, how they used these prophecies. So you have to kind of understand both pictures. You have to understand the historical narrative through the books of Kings and read the New Testament to glean those insights. So, while I tell people this is good work and clear work, it's not always easy work. It requires a bit of studying and diving in. So that being said, I believe that point is made known by 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show yourself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. If it was just something we can read and easily understand, that I don't know that verse would be in your Bible. So that being said, here we read about this Jerusalem, this bearer of good news. Isaiah is prophesying at a time where Hezekiah he was a good king, but unfortunately, he has welcomed in the king of Babylon. It seems as though he's become sort of prideful and look at what I've gained. Look at this beautiful palace I have and all that the Lord has blessed me for being a good man. May we recognize the danger in thinking like that. So Hezekiah, what does he do in his pride? He welcomes the king of Babylon. Hey, you know what? You're the world power right now. You're probably a danger and a threat. You worship idols that Israel is oftentimes captivated by. Come on in. Let me show you all that I've amassed and all that I have. Look at all my beautiful stuff. And hopefully, you're hearing that and you're saying, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Because again, number one, boasting shouldn't sound like a good idea. Boasting in what you have in and of yourself. But then also inviting the world power, the world powers weren't exactly always kind to Israel.
Wow.
Yeah. So, come on in, let me show you what we have. And then obviously we know the story. So the reason I'm saying this is Isaiah 40 verse 9 is sort of a paradox. It's a prophecy because at this time, this is not Israel bringing good news. Things do not look good. They are not bearers of good news right now in this time of the 6th century. The northern tribes have been taken over. Israel as a nation is constantly obsessed with idols. And then now we have a new world power. Things look fairly bad. And then Israel's just kind of laying their goods at the feet of this world power. So hopefully you see the paradox here. Oh, Zion, bearer of good news. Not yet. Lift up your voice mightily. She's not lifting up her voice. She's worshiping idols. Lifting up your voice is a exaltation of God. O Jerusalem, bearer of good news. Lift it up. Do not fear. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Keep in mind, these people are worshiping idols at this point. They're constantly looking to Babylon. They're constantly looking to Egypt, Assyria, and worshiping idols. So they're hardly saying, in the actual circumstance, they're not saying, here is our God. They're saying, here are the gods of the nations. Look at us. So Isaiah is prophesying to them a point that there's going to be a time where Zion becomes a bearer of good news, a time where Jerusalem becomes a bearer of good news. And if I haven't already, put the cart before the horse, which I did, of course, I showed you, it's Jesus Christ. The New Testament writers are using this exact chapter to help you understand Jesus Christ and how he fulfilled this hope. He is the good news. He's the one that makes his people the bearer of good news, so that we might say, here is our God. So continuing in that, and again, hopefully you see the contrast. The contrast is, if I'm not saying, here is my God, I'm saying, here are my goods. Here's everything I've done. Here's everything I have. Brian, you want to come see everything that I have and, boast in it and talk about it? Maybe you could show what you have. And you see, what we're not doing is we're not saying, here is my God. Right. We're boasting in our own riches and our idols, if you will. And that's what, that's the situation as we're reading through this chapter. So it's comfort in the midst of seeing the exact opposite.
Right. It would be like somebody, well, not at my age, but somebody younger, and I'm not talking a high schooler because they're different. They're not mature yet. But somebody older showing off their trophies and medals and stuff like that and saying, look what I did. Look what my team did. Well, that's fine. But go beyond that.
That's right. Thank God that he gave you the day to live so that you might run a race to win a trophy.
Right. I'm not talking about a 17-year-old in high school. That's
right.
Leave them out of it. That's something different again.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because Israel's hardly immature at this point. They've gone into bondage. They've been let out of bondage. They've experienced judgments. They should know these things. Hezekiah, for example, should have known the problem of what he was doing. And yet, unfortunately, and again, I don't necessarily mean as a person, but I mean as a nation, Israel should have known better than to constantly be boasting in their own goods and their idols. They've seen the danger of it. They've seen the judgment of it. So I'm glad that you pointed out, Brian, we're not talking about an immature young person here. We're talking about an adult, an adult people of God that should know better, yet unfortunately are running against what they know. Uh-huh. Continuing in the text, now again, we know what happens when the people of God don't live the way the Lord wants them to. This is a moment of praise, honestly, that he brings forth judgment. The Lord comes to judge his people. We see this going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. What happened when Adam sinned? The Lord walked into the garden. The Lord came into the garden. What happened when the people of Babel decided to build up? The Lord came down. That's what happens. When you decide to defy, as the people of God, you decide to defy his decrees, he is gracious to come down and correct you. So here in verse 10, we see, behold, the Lord God will come with might, with his arm ruling for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. So again, you're seeing this is going to be a picture here. The coming of the Lord is going to do two things. And we see this all throughout the New Testament. For example, the coming of the Lord brings reward to every man according to what he has done. To those who did good, good things. To those who did bad, bad things. Now we know that this is not a matter of man doing good, but rather of the Lord electing. And the reward is for those that are his, those whose hearts he has caused to look to him, to turn to him, to live in him. And the recompense are those that have been obstinate against what the Lord has provided for his people. And we know particularly that took place not only upon Israel in 586 BC at the hands of the Babylonians, but we also know, in the first century, we saw judgment come against the Jews who were obstinate against the word of God. And we saw a reward for the saints as the saints were able to escape that captivity, the judgment there in Jerusalem, and flee to the mountains, just as our Lord had told them. So Isaiah 40 verse 10 is a text that you would connect to verses in the New Testament, such as Matthew chapter 16, verses 27 through 28. That's one of those coming texts that we talk about, the Lord coming to bring judgment and bring reward to every man. Continuing into verse 11, now notice what the Lord, his coming is going to do for his people. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arms, he will gather the lambs and gather them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. So again, here we see, and this is a rebirth. So now we see they go from obstinate, mature, older men that are receiving judgment to being born again, being led by a shepherd. Preferably, we see the imagery here of Jesus being born again to be led by a shepherd who will tend his flock. And now we're being led gently as nursing ewes. You've been born again. You've been given renewed youth, because in your old age, so to speak, again, talking about Israel, they were obstinate and judgment was coming on them. So here we see this beautiful image. Isaiah 40:11 is an image of rebirth in his arms. And again, hopefully, one thing I would encourage you, verses 10 and 11, underline the word arm, his arm. That's going to help us get his arm. And the reason being is we're going to see that that's going to help us understand ultimately what Isaiah is prophesying toward. And I'll just, explain it now. He's prophesying toward the second Exodus. He's using imagery that was used in the Exodus period, where the Lord led his people into bondage and then brought them out by his mighty arm. If you remember, that's what the prophets say again and again. He did this by his mighty arm. Isaiah is using this language to help you know that there's going to be another Exodus. There's going to be a second Exodus. And as many of you know, I've taught on this quite a bit. And we've brought together many speakers, Daniel Rogers, and among others, that have helped us understand how Jesus Christ was bringing about a second Exodus. So hopefully you're seeing here, this Isaiah 40, this is a text that's really pointing to the messianic work of Jesus Christ. He is the one who would bring the comfort, the hope of Israel, the judgment of the Lord to Israel, and make things clear so that they would be a people that are comforted, that they would be a people that all things are made level for. Again, going back to those first couple verses of this chapter, where the mountains would be made low, the valleys would be made high. So it's a text of favor, showing the people of God that while things seem dismal, favor will come. God will be faithful to you. And again, hopefully we're seeing not only is he going to come to bring judgment, he's going to come to restore. Those that found themselves being old and obstinate are now being born again and are being gently led. And again, I see a beautiful promise and a beautiful reality of being in Christ in that. Continuing in the text. No, here we're going to notice these are rhetorical questions, again, highlighting the sovereignty of God. Who else can do this but God? Verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens by the span and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor, who has informed him? With whom did he consult? And who gave him understanding? Who taught him the paths of justice and taught him of knowledge and informed him of the way of understanding? So again, hopefully we see that's Here, I'll just read from my Bible. I'm reading the, I got to remember the name, Cultural Background Study Bible by John Walton. And this is what he says in his notes here. The rhetorical questions in these verses are asked in such a way as to indicate that Yahweh acted alone in creation. He had no need of any outside consultants. John Walton goes on to share about a Sumerian poem speaks similarly of the god Enlil, who makes his own decisions with no other gods present. Usually, however, divine decisions were made in consultation with others, and the ancients understood a divine council. This could be an individual group. Sometimes it's gods, and another conversation for another time. However, the ancients, and especially those that had multiple gods, they understood that the way God's divine plan came about was through group remediation, if you will. The gods coming together to come up with a decision, the oracles coming together to come up with a decision, rather than a sovereign God simply making his decree. So what we see the contrast here is, I thought about, and you're going to see as we move further in the text, I thought about the contrast between the Baal worshipers and Elijah. Whereas, your gods, seem to need consultation and need all these different things, and they don't even answer when you call on them. Whereas our God is sovereign, and he does all these things by his mighty arm, his mighty hand. So again, I just saw a contrast of sovereignty. Again, this is an indictment against the false gods that the people have been trusting in, where their gods come together and do consultation. Our God simply is sovereign and does what he will. Continuing, it'll actually make that point for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue in the text. Verse 15, behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands with fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. To who then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare him? As for the idol, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, a silversmith fashions chains of silver. He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skilled craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter. So now hopefully you notice here the text, just to bring us back to verse 15 and forward, what God is doing is he's exhorting Israel, I will provide comfort. I will provide, restoration, if you will, as we saw through these first couple verses. He's going to come and bring that judgment. He's going to lead them like a shepherd. Then he shifts his focus to help them see the reality of the nations. The nations are a drop from a bucket. They are very small. Stop looking to them as if that's where the power is. Start looking to the sovereign Lord. They are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. It's the Lord who lifts up the islands like fine dust. And then obviously including Lebanon, who's constantly mentioned within these prophecies here. I want to bring our attention to verse 17. As many of you know, this is something I've often highlighted. All the nations are nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. Now, this might make people think, well, that sounds like God doesn't care about the nations. If you remember, God has called his elect. He has his people, his image. And his image is to make his truth known to the nations so that the nations would become his people as well. So here you have two pictures. This is why I'm not a universalist. This is also why I often highlight Hebrew exclusivity. These prophecies were made to Jacob, were made to Israel. And the goal was that Israel's alive, they are the image, and the nations are dead. The nations are in need of the image bringing life to them. So here you see this contrast. The nations are nothing. They're the ones that are stuck in idolatry, worshiping idols. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless. And again, so this is just a picture of showing that Israel is the apple of his eye. And the nations around them that, unfortunately, rather than Israel recognizing the Lord has set them up to be the apple of his eye, they keep looking to the nations. They keep looking back at the power of Babylon, looking to the power of Assyria, looking to the power of Egypt, rather than recognizing the Lord has given us power. We don't need an idol. We don't need to be like the nations, as you noticed. What did it say about the nations? the nations go about forming their own idols, cutting down trees and forming idols. They're impoverished for a true offering. So what do? They seek out a tree, they cut it down, and they create an idol that they worship. And that's what, catch the paradox here. Israel is given the wisdom from the one true God that they did not make up, that has revealed himself to them. By this time in 586 BC, he's shown himself time and time again. He led them out of Egypt by his mighty arm. Yet what do? They turn around and worship the gods of Egypt. They turn around and worship the gods around them rather than recognizing the sovereignty and the power and the wisdom that the Lord has provided to them. And that's what we see happening here in this text. So the Lord, he mentioned to Israel that he's going to bring forth comfort. And then he sort of gives them this picture. Look at the nations. It's sort of like me encouraging each of you, saying, you've been set in a high place. Look at what the world looks like without Christ. Consider what they're doing. And again, hopefully you can see this reproving point here that Isaiah is trying to make, trying to get them to shake off your dismay, shake off your discouragement, and recognize that the Lord is in your midst and he's going to be favorable to you. He's going to show forth his favor. He's going to bring judgment where judgment is necessary. As you know, going to the book of Psalms, for example, oftentimes the problem with the people of God was, okay, I'm living righteous, but I'm still suffering with those that are not living righteous. When is the Lord going to bring judgment upon these righteous people, these wicked people? It seems as though the wicked prosper. And that's the picture here in Isaiah. The wicked are prospering and God is not doing anything. And then obviously Isaiah is saying, no, you don't realize because you're too focused on idolatry, that the Lord will do something. He will show himself favorable to you through his mighty arm, as he has done before, and he will do again. So again, hopefully we're seeing the encouragement that's coming from Isaiah the prophet here to his time, and hopefully to us as well.
Wow, I was just thinking of something, but
You want to share?
I guess Ronald Reagan was a prophet. I'll leave it to another time.
Well, I did when I made that statement. I'll admit this. When I made that statement that, talk about being a righteous people suffering because of the unrighteous, the wicked, and what they do, obviously I was able to kind of conjure up in my head, wow, there's a modern relevance to that.
Yeah.
So definitely, again, it rings true then and it rings true today, and hopefully we catch
the heart of man is deceitfully wicked, mentioned in the Old and the New Testament. This I brought up Reagan because obviously I don't mean that literally. I just mean symbolically for those listening. What he said about the evil empire back in the mid 1980s sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Another time.
Yeah. Hey, and the goal would be, hopefully we'd see the exhortation of the prophet Isaiah that what we could do in this time, let's take it to a modern relevance. We could begin trusting in our own efforts. We could also become is just totally dismayed. I know many around us are actually doing that, right? Just throw your hands up. This is all gone. It's all devastation. There's no hope. God isn't doing anything. Whereas we see here from the prophet Isaiah that that's not true, that in the times of dismay and devastation and disaster, if you will, God is still working. He's working toward a purpose, but we have to understand what that purpose is, which obviously we've highlighted as the truth of Jesus Christ. That, that's how the answer comes about, not by man giving up, not by man showing off his goods, so to speak, or dare I say, showing off his armor and his weaponry. That's not going to win the battle. So, there has to be a balance of how we're understanding this prophecy of Isaiah in the time to Israel in 586, correct, as well as to us in our contemporary time. For those viewing, see, there's some preterists that believe in application. So that being said, I wanted to take us a little bit further. I want to try to have us possibly end this chapter before we go, concluding our study. Verse 21, do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? I like this text because, again, it makes my point that Israel knows this truth. This isn't the Lord telling them something they didn't know before. They've seen the Lord comfort them before. They've seen the powerful hand of God before. How dare you find yourself in this situation where now you're sitting there saying, is God going to do anything? Does he even care? Israel, shake yourself from your slumber. That's what Isaiah is trying to do. Recognize that you've known this message. You've heard this for, hundreds of years, that, the Lord has worked in your favor, even in the midst of dismal circumstances. Again, I would dare say, bring their mind back to Egypt. That's why I think Isaiah is doing this, where he's using Exodus imagery, trying to help them. Remember how you came out of Egypt? Was that your doing? Was that because you had mighty armies and mighty swords, or was it because the Lord led you by his powerful arm? So then why do you find yourself in a similar circumstance, and yet now you've given up hope? Have you not heard from the beginning? You see, that's that exhortation to Israel. Here in verse 22, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out to like a tent to dwell in. Now, what this should do is, that's a prophecy right there. That should help us understand the sovereignty of God. He who sits above the circle of the earth. Now, interestingly enough, the ancients didn't view this as a sphere. The word actually used here is not talking about the sphere of the earth. The ancients actually believed in a sort of if I may read it the way my Bible explains it, it says the common ancient Near Eastern perspective of the heavens was that of an inverted bowl covering the earth itself above the primeval waters, which surmounted the underworld. So they believed there was a sort of sphere on the top of the planet, a flat, again, the ancient Eastern near cosmology was a bit confusing. But the point being here, this text isn't talking about the shape of the planet. It's not telling us whether it's round or flat. It's a prophecy helping us understand through their lens, that ancient lens, that God is sovereign. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. They're small. That should remind us of when you remember when Israel went into the promised land out of the Exodus. Again, there's reasons why Isaiah is using this language. When they came out of the Exodus and they went to enter into the land, if you remember, what was it, Joshua and Caleb, they go into the land and they come back. And what do they tell the people of Israel?
Overwhelmed.
We appeared as grasshoppers in their sight, meaning the people in that nation are too big for us. We're going to go over there and they're going to devastate us. So again, notice how Isaiah uses this. He contrasts the Lord, who sits above the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants of the earth are like grasshoppers, meaning they're small, they're nothing. So why you grasshoppers are looking among the grasshoppers and trying to find strength, when you should be recognizing that it is the Lord who sits above the circle of the earth. Again, there's Isaiah's exhortation to recognize the sovereignty of God. Verse 23, he it is who reduces rulers to nothing. Again, continuing this point here, who makes the judges of earth meaningless. It's God. He's the sovereign. The rulers that you're looking to and, fretting because of or glorifying in, he can reduce them to nothing. The judges that you're, fretting because of or, putting glory in, he can make them meaningless. So that's his point here, Isaiah. He's trying to stir his people to stop looking around at the grasshoppers, so to speak. Stop looking at the dismal situation and recognize what the Lord has continued to bring forth by his mighty arm. Continuing into 24, scarcely they have been planted, scarcely they have been sown, scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. You really want to put your hope in these things? I mean, the Lord literally breathe on them and they will be blown away. To whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One. As you all know here in this study, the prophets are constantly railing against Israel for their idolatry. That's the problem. They've been captivated by idols. So what the Lord's rebuke here is, who will you liken me to? Who will you say that I'm his equal? Because again, they're not focusing on him. They're focusing on whatever ruler or judge they're looking to, whatever grasshopper, so to speak, they're looking to. So he's saying, well, pick a grasshopper that you want to liken me to, that you think is worthy to be compared to me. Verse 26, lift up your eyes on high and see who created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Now, I must say here, I know many people, maybe you began to think about the planetarium when you were a kid, and you would look up and you'd see all the stars in the sky and that beautiful picture there. A beautiful picture to help us understand the sovereignty and have awe of God. Yes, amen. And that's what Isaiah is doing. He's using imagery here to help you have awe of God. However, the Lord calls them by name because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power. Not one of them is missing. Now, again, from a very rudiment reading, you might say, that's great. The skies continue the way that God wants them to, which is a beautiful thing. That's a great reality. However, hopefully we noticed, we already talked about grass being people, grasshoppers being people. There's a lot of imagery in this text, talking about real life situation, not talking about the planet. We actually, matter of fact, there was a verse before we talked about where it wasn't talking about the planet. Well, that was the grass, etc. So that being said, I want to highlight that there's something covenantal that stands out to me here in this text, verse 26. When Abraham was given a promise about his lineage, what was he told? Does anybody remember?
You count the many stars, you'll be counting your offspring, so to speak.
That's right. So there you have it. Here you have the prophet Isaiah being told sort of a similar thing here. Count the stars. Look at the stars. The Lord leads his people by name because of the greatness of his might, because that's the context we've been talking about. We're not talking about the planet. We're talking about God and his people and how they're in this devastating moment, and God is going to work favorably toward them. So what you're seeing here in verse 26 is actually a covenant promise that the Lord would not lose any who are his. Not one of them is missing. And again, hopefully that sounded familiar to you, because Jesus Christ says that. He says that all that the Lord has given to me has put in my hand, dare I say the stars, that the Lord has put into his hand, the people will not be lost. That's John, I want to say it's John chapter 17, probably a correlating text to that. So again, notice, not one of them is missing. The reason I think that's important to highlight is that, unfortunately, when people read through the prophetic literature, they lose the focus because of the way the prophets use all this different language: heaven, earth, grass, grasshoppers, wind, sea, the nations. People get caught up in this sort of globalist perspective of, every day it's talking about the planet, it's talking about, all these different things. If we keep the focus of what Isaiah has been talking about since chapter 1, again, I know it's been a couple, probably a year now that we've been in Isaiah. So let me bring your mind back to chapter 1. Say this to Jerusalem and Judah. That's the point here. This is a prophecy about his people and how they're living in a dismal time. They're living in a time that it seems as though they're without hope, but the Lord is going to restore them. And everything that we're reading here, these stars, the grass, is all, even, and dare I say this, as we move further, heaven and earth. When you read this heaven and earth language, he didn't all of a sudden say, I was talking about my people, now let me tell you about the planet. It's all about his people. It's just using different imagery to talk about the same point again and again and again. The Lord will show himself faithful to his people. If you are his people, do not fret. Do not look to other nations. Do not develop idolatry, but rather know and trust in him, the sovereign God, who, again, because of his greatness and might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Again, this is a picture of God's sovereignty, election, and power and providence on behalf of his people. And that's what we're seeing all throughout this chapter. He's going to do it again. What he did in times past through the Exodus, he's going to do it again. That's what Isaiah is telling his generation. He's going to bring us out of bondage and bring us into this promised land. And I'll go ahead and just sum up these last couple verses and ask if anybody has anything you want to kind of jump in and share. I believe the last couple verses kind of summarize my points that I've made throughout this program here. Why do you say, O Jacob, in case we were curious about who we were talking about here, we're talking to Israel, Jacob. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due to me escapes the notice of my God? Notice their attitude. God doesn't even see us. He's not even paying attention. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. What I thought of when I read that verse earlier today was, again, as I mentioned before, Elijah and the Baal worshipers. If you remember, when Elijah and the Baal worshipers were there, what did Elijah say to the people? He said, what, is your God asleep? Your God doesn't answer. He doesn't hear your prayers. Again, this is that contrast of idolatry. So what verse 428 is saying is, do you not know, have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, is not like the other gods who become weary and become tired, and that you seem to discern. They have to do this this group meeting to decide what needs to be done to care for their people, whereas our God is sovereign, doesn't need group meetings, and he never becomes tired or weary. And again, his way is inscrutable. It's beyond understanding, and he brings it about as he chooses to reveal it through the law and the prophets. Notice the encouragement that comes with that. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. The youth grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Hopefully you've seen, that's a prophecy that's very popular. Matter of fact, Brian and Sandy, you both gave me a statue that has that verse written right there on it on the bottom as an encouragement. And hopefully you saw this whole text is bringing the people of God back to the Exodus. Because again, if you remember, Exodus chapter 19, how did God take Israel out of Egypt? On wings of eagles. So again, you're seeing that the whole point of this chapter was to remind Israel that when you find yourselves living in a situation that reminds you of Egypt, bondage, and no hope. Again, remember what the situation was like before Egypt, where they had famine. Remember, Jacob had to have his sons go up to Egypt and ask of the people. It wasn't exactly the God is with us moment for Israel. It was, man, we have to go to Egypt and rely on them, but we're supposed to be the people of God. So the point being, when you find yourselves living in a dismal situation where it seems as though you need to rely upon the nations, remember the arm of God. Remember where God is, remember the wings of the eagles, where the Lord has shown himself faithful to you in times past, and he will do it again. That's why the chapter started out with comfort, comfort my people. So what we're seeing here obviously is a messianic prophecy, that this is all pointing to, well, where will our hope come from? And we know when they come out of Babylonian captivity, none of this becomes their reality. And yet they go through a time of confusion, if you will. I don't call it silence because it was hardly silent, but they go through this time of confusion, and yet Christ is born. And then as we see the New Testament writers use these prophecies to point out this is what was being hoped for. So I hope in the very least this morning, I gave you a bit more context to this prophecy we read here in Isaiah 40, verse 31, about soaring upon eagle's wings, gaining new strength. And prayerfully, we saw that where old covenant Israel was being compared to an old man who has lost his strength, who has become obstinate in his way of life. But the Lord is going to bring forth comfort, is going to cause them to be born again, to renew their strength, to not get tired, and to not be obstinate any longer, but rather to see the Lord sovereign and providential as he is. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Nice to see it clear like this. Very nice.
Oh, that's good. Again, I was excited because it adds context to a verse that we often use, that we use as encouragement, and prayerfully we see the whole chapter as encouragement, even when we go into the context. So thank you. Well, that about wraps up our study. I'm glad to say that we went to the same time that we would if we were here in person. And we usually go a bit over. We start a bit late and we go a bit later. So I thank you for being a part of our online study. And as you know, we'll go ahead and I don't know that we're going to have a time of fellowship. This is our time of fellowship. However, we're going to go ahead and 10:30, we'll go live again. Hopefully you'll both join with us. Rashonda, hopefully you'll be here and we will go in on our worship service. Sound good?
See you then.
All right. Thank you for being a part of this.
Michael, God bless you, my friend.
God bless you, brother. Go in peace.
Thank you. It's wonderful, huh?